The divorce papers were signed in red ink, but what stopped my heart wasn't the signature. It was the positive pregnancy test resting on top of them, and the silence in the house that screamed I was already too late. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If that intro sent a shiver down your spine, you are in for a wild ride today. We are starting a brand new, intense story about regret, secrets, and a chase that will leave you breathless. If you love emotional roller coasters and Omegaverse dramas, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment Team Omega or Team Alpha down below to let us know whose side you're on. Now let's dive into the story. Part 1. The penthouse smelled of rain and expensive leather, a scent that Julian usually associated with peace. It was the smell of success. At 32, Julian Thorne was the youngest CEO in the history of the Thorne conglomerate, a prime alpha who commanded rooms with a single glance and shifted stock markets with a single word. He was used to the world bending to his will. He was used to order. But tonight, as the private elevator doors slid open with a soft hydraulic hiss, the order felt disrupted. The lights were off. Julian frowned, stepping out of the elevator and loosening the silk tie around his neck. "Elian," he called out. His voice echoed off the marble floors and floor-to-ceiling glass windows that overlooked the glistening skyline of the city. Usually, Elian would be here. His quiet, submissive Omega husband was always here. Elian was the constant in Julian's chaotic life, a soft, vanilla-scented presence that Julian had admittedly taken for granted over the last 2 years. Elian would usually be sitting on the velvet armchair by the window, a book in his hand, waiting to ask Julian if he wanted dinner, or tea, or a bath drawn. Julian would usually wave him off, tired from a day of hostile takeovers and board meetings, muttering about being too busy. Tonight, there was no greeting. No scent of vanilla. Just the cold, recycled air of the climate control system. "Elian, stop playing games." "I'm tired," Julian grumbled, tossing his briefcase onto the sprawling sectional sofa. He rubbed his temples. The merger with the Kincaid family had been a nightmare today. He just wanted a drink in silence. Well, he had the silence. He walked to the kitchen island, intending to pour himself a glass of whiskey. That's when he saw it. His personal phone. The sleek, black device was sitting right in the center of the white marble island, gleaming under the singular pendant light that had been left on. Julian froze. He patted his pockets instinctively. Empty. He cursed under his breath. He must have left it this morning in his rush. He had been so focused on the meeting with Lydia Kincaid that he'd grabbed his work tablet and stormed out, leaving his primary communication device behind. "Damn it," he muttered, reaching for the phone. Elian probably tried to call the office all day. He picked it up. The screen woke up instantly. It wasn't locked. Julian paused. He always kept his phone locked. Biometric security, facial recognition, a 6-digit PIN. But the device was sitting open, the screen glowing brightly. And it wasn't on the home screen. It was open to his messages. Specifically, a thread with Lydia. A cold prickle of unease started at the base of Julian's neck. He looked down at the text bubbles, reading the last exchange from this morning. Messages he had sent from his tablet, which synced to this phone. "Lydia, 8:30 a.m. Are you sure the little Omega won't make a scene at the gala tonight? The press is going to be all over the merger announcement." "Julian, 8:32 a.m. Elian?" He won't say a word. He does what he's told. He's harmless, Lydia. Just a pretty face to wear the ring until the deal is done. "Lydia, 8:33 a.m. good. Because once we sign the papers, you know what needs to happen. You can't be tied to a low-status Omega if you want to run the global division. We need to cut him loose." "Julian, 8:35 a.m. I know. Let me handle it. I'll give him a settlement and send him back to the countryside. He's boring anyway. I need someone with fire, not a submissive ghost." Julian stared at the words. He remembered typing them. He remembered the casual cruelty of them, spoken in the heat of business strategy, trying to impress Lydia, trying to prove he was ruthless enough to lead the new joint company. He hadn't meant them, not entirely. Elian was quiet, yes, but Julian cared for him, in his own way. He provided for him. He gave him this penthouse, the clothes, the life of luxury. But reading them now, in the silence of the empty kitchen, they looked different. They looked like a knife. "Elian!" Julian shouted, the panic suddenly rising in his chest, sharp and acidic. He spun around and ran toward the hallway. "Elian, listen to me, it was just talk. It was business." He threw open the door to the master bedroom. Empty. The bed was made with military precision, the duvet smooth and unwrinkled. The closet doors were wide open. Julian rushed to them. Elian's side of the walk-in closet was usually filled with the soft pastel sweaters and loose linens he preferred. Now only the wooden hangers remained, swaying slightly in the draft from the air vent. They clattered against each other, a hollow, wooden sound that mocked him. Gone. Everything was gone. No, no, no. Julian scrambled backward, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He checked the bathroom. The toiletries were gone. The toothbrush was gone. The scent of vanilla that usually lingered in the steam was fading, replaced by the sterile smell of cleaning products. He ran back to the living room, his mind racing. Where could he go? Elian had no family. Julian had made sure of that, not out of malice, but because Elian's parents had passed away years ago. Elian had no money of his own, only the allowance Julian gave him. How far could he get? Julian grabbed his phone again, his fingers trembling as he dialed Elian's number. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Please check the number and try again. Julian slammed the phone down on the counter with a roar of frustration. The sound shattered the oppressive quiet. He gripped the edge of the marble, his knuckles turning white. You think you can just leave? Julian hissed to the empty room, his alpha instincts flaring, a mix of possessiveness and wounded pride. You think you can walk out on me? He was about to call his head of security, to order a city-wide manhunt, to drag his wayward husband back home by force if necessary, when something on the dining table caught his eye. It was a single envelope, cream-colored, heavy cardstock. It sat right in the center of the dark mahogany table, impossible to miss. Julian walked over to it slowly, his breath catching in his throat. His hands shook as he reached for it. There was no name on the front, just a simple, elegant script that he recognized instantly as Elian's handwriting. He tore it open. Inside, there were two things. The first was a document, a divorce petition. It was already signed. Elian's signature was neat, steady, without a hint of hesitation. The second object slid out of the envelope and clattered onto the table with a plastic thud. It was a pregnancy test. Two bold, pink lines. Julian stared at it. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The roar of the city outside, the hum of the refrigerator, the beating of his own heart, everything went silent. All he could see were those two lines. Pregnant. Elian was pregnant. Memories crashed into Julian's mind like a tidal wave. The way Elian had been sleeping more lately. The way he had avoided wine at dinner for the past month. The way he had tried to talk to Julian 3 days ago, standing in the doorway of the study, his hand resting subconsciously on his stomach. Julian, do you have a moment? I need to tell you something important. Not now, Elian. Julian had snapped, not even looking up from his laptop. Can't you see I'm working? Go buy yourself something if you're bored. Elian had gone pale. He had nodded, whispered a soft, I'm sorry, and closed the door. Julian let out a strangled sound, a mix of a sob and a growl. He grabbed the pregnancy test, gripping it so hard the plastic creaked. He had called him boring. He had called him a ghost. He had told Lydia he would send him back to the countryside. And Elian had heard it all. Elian had read every word while carrying Julian's heir. He took the baby, Julian whispered, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow. He took my child. The shock dissolved, replaced instantly by a cold, terrifying clarity. The alpha in him woke up, not the businessman, not the CEO, but the predator. The primal part of him that protected what was his. He grabbed his phone again. This time, he didn't call Elian. He dialed his chief of security, Marcus. Sir. Marcus answered on the first ring. Lock it down, Julian ordered, his voice low and dangerous, vibrating with a lethal intensity. Lock down the airports. Lock down the train stations. Check every credit card transaction under Elian Thorne's name in the last 12 hours. Sir? Is there a threat? My husband has been kidnapped, Julian lied, his eyes burning as he stared at the empty closet. He couldn't admit Elian had left him. He couldn't admit he had driven him away. Or he's confused. It doesn't matter. Find him. Mobilize the entire private guard. I want every camera in the city scrubbed. Understood. What is the priority level? Code red, Julian snarled, slamming his fist onto the table, right next to the divorce papers. He is carrying my heir. If anyone touches a hair on his head, I will burn this city to the ground. He hung up and stood alone in the penthouse that was now a mausoleum of his own making. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy with the weight of his sins. He walked to the window, pressing his hand against the cold glass. The city lights blurred before his eyes. You can run, Elian, Julian whispered to the night, his voice breaking. But you can't hide. Not from me. I will find you. And when I do, he didn't finish the sentence. Because deep down, beneath the anger and the alpha posturing, Julian felt a terrifying, unfamiliar emotion gripping his heart. Fear. Because for the first time in his life, Julian Thorne wasn't sure if he could fix this. He wasn't sure if money or power or threats could bring back the man who had looked at those text messages, packed his bags, and decided that a life alone was better than a life with Julian. Julian looked back at the table. Under the pregnancy test, there was a small sticky note he hadn't seen before. He walked back and picked it up. 3 words. You wanted fire. Julian crushed the note in his fist. He turned and stormed toward the elevator. The hunt was on. End of part 1. Part 2. The silence in the penthouse was no longer just an absence of sound. It was a physical weight, pressing against Julian's chest, suffocating the alpha within him. It had been 4 hours. 4 hours since he had walked through the door. 4 hours since his world had shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Julian paced the length of the living room, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the marble. The sound was manic, like the ticking of a bomb that had already detonated. Report, Julian barked, not stopping his pacing. Marcus, his chief of security, stood by the modular sofa, looking uncharacteristically nervous. He held a tablet in his hands, his fingers swiping through data streams. Sir, we've scrubbed the security footage from the building. We have a visual on Mr. Thorne leaving the premises at 10:14 a.m. 10:14 a.m., Julian repeated, checking his watch. That was minutes after Julian had sent those texts to Lydia. Minutes. Elian hadn't hesitated. He hadn't waited for an explanation. He had seen the betrayal and walked out. Show me, Julian demanded, snatching the tablet from Marcus's hands. The grainy black and white footage played on the screen. Julian's breath hitched. There was Elian. He looked small. He was wearing a heavy trench coat that seemed to swallow his slender frame, a beanie pulled low over his silver blonde hair. He wasn't carrying a suitcase. He wasn't carrying the designer bags Julian had bought him from Paris or Milan. He was carrying a single, battered duffel bag. An old gym bag Julian had thrown out years ago, or so he thought. He didn't take the car, Marcus said quietly. He didn't call a driver. He walked out the service entrance, sir. He blended in with the catering staff leaving the building. Julian stared at the screen, freezing the frame on Elian's face. Even in the low resolution, he could see the set of Elian's jaw. There were no tears, no hysterics, just a cold, determined steel that Julian had never seen before. It was the face of someone who had nothing left to lose. Where did he go from there? Julian asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. That's where it gets complicated, sir. Marcus hesitated. He walked 3 blocks to the subway station. He bought a ticket with cash. We lost him in the crowd at Grand Central. He didn't use his credit cards. He didn't use his bank account. His phone, the one you gave him, was found in a trash can on 42nd Street. Cash. Julian frowned, handing the tablet back. Elian doesn't have cash. I pay for everything. His cards are linked to my accounts. Apparently not everything, Marcus said, pulling up another file. We did a deep dive into the household accounts. For the last 2 years, the grocery budget has been slightly inflated. Household supplies, dry cleaning, small amounts, sir. $10 here, $20 there. Over 2 years, he managed to siphon off about $5,000. Julian felt a wave of nausea. $5,000. It was nothing to Julian, it was the cost of a business lunch. But to Elian, it was an escape fund. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Elian hadn't just left because of the texts today. He had been preparing. He had been scared. He had been saving pennies, hiding them away like a squirrel preparing for a harsh winter, terrified that one day Julian would cast him aside. I'll give him a settlement and send him back to the countryside. Julian's own text message echoed in his mind. Elian had known. Maybe he hadn't seen the texts until today, but he had felt it. He had felt Julian's coldness, his dismissal, his slow drift toward Lydia, and the power she represented. Elian had been living in fear of this very moment, and Julian had been too blind, too arrogant to see it. He's pregnant, Marcus, Julian whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He's out there alone, with $5,000 and my unborn child, in a city that eats Omegas alive. We will find him, sir, Marcus assured him. We have facial recognition running on every public transport camera in the tri-state area. It's not enough, Julian roared, kicking the coffee table. The heavy glass shattered, shards flying across the room. I want private investigators in every shelter, every clinic, every cheap motel within a 100-mile radius. Get Lydia on the phone. Now. Marcus nodded and stepped away to make the calls. Julian collapsed onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. The scent of vanilla was faint on the cushions, fading with every passing minute. He inhaled deeply, trying to capture it, to imprint it on his memory. Why hadn't he smelled the change in Elian's scent? A pregnant Omega's scent changes. It becomes sweeter, milkier, more protective. Julian had been so busy, so wrapped up in the merger, that he hadn't even touched his husband in weeks. He hadn't been close enough to smell the life growing inside him. The phone in his pocket buzzed. It was Lydia. Julian answered, his grip on the phone threatening to crush it. Lydia. Julian, darling. Lydia's voice purred, smooth and oblivious. I heard a rumor that security is swarming your building. Is everything all right? The press is asking questions about the gala tonight. You are still coming, aren't you? The audacity of her tone made Julian's vision swim with red. The gala, he said, his voice deadly calm, is cancelled. There was a pause on the other end. Excuse me? Julian, we can't cancel. The shareholders. I don't give a damn about the shareholders. Julian shouted, standing up again. Elian is gone, Lydia. He saw the messages. He saw what we wrote. Oh, Lydia said. Her tone didn't sound apologetic. It sounded annoyed. Well, that's unfortunate timing. But surely this simplifies things? If he's left, you can file for abandonment. It makes the divorce cleaner. We don't have to pay him a settlement. The coldness of her logic, the absolute lack of empathy, struck Julian with the force of a revelation. This was the woman he had been trying to impress? This was the fire he thought he wanted? He is pregnant, Julian hissed. Silence. A long, heavy silence. That complicates things, Lydia said finally, her voice harder. Is it yours? Don't you dare, Julian growled, a low rumble starting in his chest that was pure alpha aggression. Don't you dare finish that sentence. Of course it's mine. And if I find out you had anything to do with him feeling unsafe, if you ever spoke to him. I never spoke to the boy, Lydia snapped. Look, Julian, you need to calm down. You're letting your hormones get the better of you. It's just an Omega. They get emotional. He's probably hiding in a hotel waiting for you to come beg. Just let him cool off. You don't know him, Julian said. He's not playing a game. He's gone. Then let him go. Lydia yelled. Focus on the merger. Focus on the future. He is my future. Julian screamed, and then hung up. He hurled the phone across the room. It smashed against the wall, leaving a dent in the plaster. He stood there, panting, his chest heaving. He had cut the tie. The merger was likely dead. His reputation would be in tatters by morning. He didn't care. He needed to think like Elian. Where would he go? Elian had no family. But he had hobbies. Julian frowned, trying to remember what Elian did with his days. He read books. He gardened on the terrace. He painted. Painting. Julian ran toward the guest room down the hall, the one Elian used as a studio. Julian rarely went in there. He considered art a waste of time. He threw the door open. The room was cluttered with canvases. The smell of turpentine and oil paint mixed with the lingering vanilla scent. Julian walked in, his eyes scanning the room. There were landscapes. Beautiful, melancholic landscapes of stormy seas and dark forests. But in the corner, covered by a dropped cloth, was a large easel. Julian approached it slowly. He pulled the cloth away. He gasped. It was a portrait. It was Julian, but not the Julian that the world saw, not the cold, ruthless CEO in a suit. It was Julian asleep. His face softened, his guard down, looking peaceful. The lighting in the painting was warm, golden. It was painted with so much love, so much tenderness, that it made Julian's heart ache physically. Elian saw him like this. Elian saw the good in him, even when Julian couldn't see it himself. And below the painting, on the small wooden shelf of the easel, was a sketchbook. Julian grabbed it, flipping through the pages frantically. Sketches of baby clothes. Sketches of a nursery. Lists of names. Arthur. Leo. Silas. And then, on the very last page, a drawing of a house. It was a small, cottage-style house with a wraparound porch, sitting on the edge of a cliff overlooking an ocean. It looked lonely. Isolated. Underneath the drawing, Elian had written a single coordinate. 44.2312 degrees north, 68.2165 degrees west. Julian stared at the numbers. He pulled out his work tablet, the one he hadn't smashed, and typed the coordinates into the map. Mount Desert Island, Maine. It was hundreds of miles away. It was remote. It was cold. Why there? Julian zoomed in on the satellite view. It was a dense forest area, near a small fishing town called Bar Harbor. Then he remembered. 3 years ago, on their honeymoon, the only vacation they had ever taken, they had driven through Maine. Elian had stared out the window at the ocean, his eyes wide with wonder. It's so quiet here, Julian. No reporters. No shareholders. Just the wind. I think I could breathe here. Julian had laughed then. It's in the middle of nowhere, Elian. We'd die of boredom in a week. But Elian hadn't forgotten. He had been planning this. The coordinates weren't for a house that existed. They were for a plot of land. Or maybe a rental. Marcus. Julian yelled, running back into the hallway. Get the jet ready. Now. Sir. Marcus appeared from the kitchen. Did we find something? Maine, Julian said, his eyes burning with a renewed, frantic hope. He's going to Maine. Call the Bar Harbor police. Tell them to look for a pregnant Omega, blonde, likely traveling by bus or hitchhiking. Tell them there is a $10 million reward for his safe return. 10 million. Marcus's eyes widened. Sir, that kind of money brings out the wrong kind of people. Bounty hunters, criminals. I don't care. Julian grabbed Marcus by the lapels of his jacket. I want eyes on every road leading into that town. He is not spending a night in the cold. Do you understand me? Yes, sir. As Marcus scrambled to relay the orders, Julian ran to the master bedroom to pack a bag. He grabbed sweaters, Elian's sweaters that had been left behind. He grabbed the prenatal vitamins he found in the bathroom cabinet. He grabbed the wedding ring Elian had left on the nightstand. He paused, looking at the ring. It was platinum, simple, elegant. Inside, it was engraved, forever yours. I'm coming, Elian, Julian whispered, sliding the ring onto his own pinky finger because it was too small for his ring finger. I'm coming. Meanwhile, somewhere on I-95 North. The Greyhound bus smelled of stale coffee and diesel fumes. The suspension groaned with every pothole, jolting the passengers in their seats. Elian sat in the very back, curled into a tight ball against the window. He had pulled his knees up to his chest, his arms wrapped protectively around his stomach. The oversized coat hid his figure, but he felt exposed. Every time the bus slowed down, every time a police siren wailed in the distance, his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was exhausted. His body ached. The morning sickness had been fighting him for hours, a constant nausea that made the swaying of the bus unbearable. But he couldn't stop. He couldn't get off. He looked down at his hands. They were trembling. He wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to the cold, the hunger, the fear. For 5 years, he had lived in a gilded cage. He had been warm, fed, and pampered. But he had been lonely. God, he had been so lonely. He pulled his phone out of his pocket. Not the expensive smartphone Julian had given him, but a cheap, plastic burner phone he had bought at a bodega with cash. He stared at the black screen. He wanted to turn it on. He wanted to check the news. He wanted to know if Julian had noticed he was gone. He probably hasn't even come home yet, a dark voice whispered in his mind. He's probably with Lydia, celebrating the merger, celebrating his freedom. The tears burned his eyes, hot and stinging, but he refused to let them fall. He had cried enough. He had cried when he read the texts. He had cried when he packed the bag. He had cried when he left his wedding ring on the table. Now he had to be strong. Not for himself. He didn't care what happened to himself, but for the tiny spark of life inside him. His hand drifted to his lower abdomen, resting there gently. I won't let him send you away, Elian whispered to the window, his voice barely audible over the roar of the engine. I won't let him call you a burden. I won't let him raise you to be cold and cruel like him. The bus driver's voice crackled over the intercom. Next stop, Portland, Maine. 15-minute break. Portland. He was getting closer. But he was still hours away from the coordinates. Hours away from the safe house he had arranged months ago through an anonymous Omega support network online. It wasn't much, a dilapidated cabin that needed work, but it was off the grid. It was safe. Elian shifted in his seat, trying to find a comfortable position. As he moved, the person sitting next to him stirred. It was a man, an alpha. Elian could smell the pheromones, musk and cheap tobacco. The man had been eyeing him for the last 100 miles. You okay there, sweetheart? The man asked, his voice rough. He leaned a little too close. You look like you're running from something. Elian stiffened. He pulled his coat tighter. I'm fine, he muttered, keeping his head down. Just motion sickness. Distinctive scent you got there. The man sniffed the air loudly. Vanilla. And something else, something sweet. Milk. Elian's blood ran cold. The scent blockers he had applied this morning were wearing off. He was leaking distress pheromones, and the pregnancy scent was starting to bleed through. "Leave me alone," Elian said, turning his body toward the window. "Hey, no need to be rude," the alpha sneered. "I'm just being friendly. It's a long ride. Maybe we can help each other out." The man's hand drifted toward Elian's knee. Elian flinched violently, slapping the hand away. "Don't touch me." A few heads turned in the rows ahead of them. The alpha pulled his hand back, his face darkening with anger. "Touchy," he muttered. "Fine. Suit yourself." But Elian saw the look in the man's eyes. It wasn't over. The man was watching him like a predator watches a wounded gazelle. He knew Elian was vulnerable. He knew Elian was alone. Elian's grip on the burner phone tightened. He needed to get off this bus. He couldn't wait for Bar Harbor. This man would follow him. As the bus pulled into the Portland station, the brakes hissing, Elian made a decision. He grabbed his duffel bag. "Rest stop," the driver announced. Elian waited for the alpha to stand up to stretch his legs. As soon as the man was in the aisle, blocked by other passengers, Elian shoved past him. "Hey," the man shouted. "Sorry, excuse me, sick." Elian gasped, pushing through the crowd. He stumbled down the steps of the bus and into the cold night air of the station. He didn't go to the bathroom. He didn't go to the vending machines. He ran. He ran out of the station, into the dark streets of a city he didn't know. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs shook. He ducked into an alleyway, hiding behind a dumpster, trying to catch his breath. He was shaking uncontrollably now. The cold was biting through his coat. He was alone in Maine, in the middle of the night, with a predator on his tail and his husband hunting him down. He slid down the brick wall, sitting on the dirty pavement. He pulled the burner phone out again. He needed help. He couldn't do this alone. He dialed the only number he had memorized besides Julian's. A number he hadn't called in 6 years. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Hello," a sleepy voice answered. A beta's voice, calm and steady. "Noah." Elian sobbed, his resolve finally breaking. "Noah, please. I need help." There was a pause. "Elian, is that you? Oh my God. Where are you? Julian has been all over the news. They're saying you were kidnapped." "I wasn't kidnapped," Elian cried. "I ran away. Noah, I'm in Portland. I'm scared. There's someone following me. Please." "Stay there," Noah said, his voice instantly sharp and alert. "Tell me exactly where you are." "I'm in Boston. I can be there in 2 hours. Do not move. Do not talk to anyone." "Okay," Elian whispered. "Okay." He hung up and curled tighter into himself. He closed his eyes, visualizing the face of the baby he had never met. Just hold on, he thought. Just hold on a little longer. But as he sat there in the dark, he didn't notice the black SUV rolling slowly down the street, its headlights cutting through the fog. He didn't notice the window rolling down. And he didn't see the man in the passenger seat holding a device that was beeping rhythmically, tracking a signal. Not the burner phone. The tracking chip embedded in the sole of his shoe. A chip Julian had installed in all his shoes years ago, for his safety. The SUV stopped at the mouth of the alley. End of Part 2. Part 3. The alleyway was a throat of darkness, swallowing the faint light from the street lamps. Elian pressed himself harder against the cold, rough brick, his breath coming in shallow, terrified gasps. The black SUV sat at the entrance of the alley like a dormant beast, its engine purring with a low, menacing rumble. The headlights cut through the fog, blindingly bright, creating long, distorted shadows that stretched toward him. Elian's hand flew to his mouth to stifle a sob. "They found me." But who? Who was it? The passenger door opened. A silhouette stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered. But the scent that drifted on the wind wasn't the rich, oppressive aroma of expensive whiskey and ozone that belonged to Julian. It was sterile. Gun oil and beta blockers. Security. Elian's heart sank. It was Marcus, Julian's hound, the man who never failed a mission. "Mr. Thorne." Marcus's voice carried down the alley, calm and terrifyingly professional. "Please step out. We have a visual on you. The tracking signal is strong." Elian looked down at his shoes, the expensive sneakers Julian had bought him last month because he said Elian needed proper arch support. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in Elian's throat. It wasn't about support. It was a leash. He had been wearing a shackle this entire time. "I'm not going back." Elian screamed, his voice cracking. He scrambled to his feet, looking for a back exit. A fence? A fire escape? Anything. "Grab him," Marcus ordered into his headset. But before the security team could advance, a shadow detached itself from the wall directly behind Elian. A heavy, calloused hand clamped over Elian's mouth. "Found you, pretty thing." a rough voice hissed in his ear. Elian froze. The smell of stale tobacco and unwashed musk flooded his senses. It was the Alpha from the bus. He hadn't stopped following him. He had tracked Elian's scent trail into the alley while the security team tracked the digital signal. Let go. Elian muffled against the hand, thrashing wildly. You have no idea what you're worth on the black market, the creep whispered, dragging Elian backward into the deeper shadows. A pregnant, high-class Omega? I could retire on you. Elian kicked out, his heel connecting with the Alpha's shin, but the man didn't even flinch. He tightened his grip, his fingers digging bruisingly into the soft skin of Elian's arm. Let him go. Marcus's voice boomed, no longer calm. The security team swarmed the alley. Flashlights pierced the darkness. Back off, the bus Alpha roared, pulling a switchblade from his pocket and pressing the cold steel against Elian's throat. One step closer, and I open him up. The world seemed to slow down. Elian felt the sharp bite of the blade against his skin. He felt the rapid, terrified flutter of the baby inside him, as if the child could sense the danger. Tears streamed down his face, hot and fast. I'm sorry, he thought, closing his eyes. I'm so sorry, little one. Drop the weapon, Marcus said, his gun raised. The red laser danced on the attacker's forehead. Get me a car, the attacker shouted, his spit hitting Elian's cheek. I'm taking him with me. Suddenly, a roar tore through the night sky. Not a car engine. A helicopter. The wind from the rotors whipped the trash in the alley into a frenzy. A spotlight from above pinned the group in a circle of blinding white light. The distraction was all Marcus needed. Bang. A single, suppressed shot. The pressure on Elian's throat vanished. The creepy Alpha groaned, his knee shattering, and he collapsed backward, releasing Elian. Elian stumbled forward, falling to his knees on the wet pavement. He wrapped his arms around his stomach, hyperventilating. Secure him. Marcus barked. Two security guards rushed toward Elian. They didn't help him up gently. They grabbed his arms, efficient and firm. No. No, please. Elian struggled, his heels dragging on the asphalt. Let me go. I don't want to go back. It's for your own safety, sir, one of the guards said monotone. They dragged him toward the SUV. The back door flew open, and there he was, Julian. He wasn't in the helicopter. He had been in the car behind the SUV. He looked wrecked. Julian Thorne, the impeccably groomed CEO, looked like he had walked through hell. His tie was gone. His shirt was unbuttoned at the top, revealing a sheen of sweat. His eyes were red-rimmed, wild, and desperate. Elian! Julian gasped, scrambling out of the car. He reached for Elian, his hands trembling. Don't touch me. Elian shrieked, shrinking away, pressing himself against the dirty tire of the SUV. Don't you dare touch me. The rejection hit Julian like a physical slap. He froze, his hands hovering in the air. The scent coming off Elian was pungent, sour milk, burnt sugar, and overwhelming fear. It was the scent of an Omega in absolute distress. Elian, you're bleeding, Julian whispered, pointing to a small cut on Elian's neck where the knife had pressed. You're hurt. Get in the car. Please. It's freezing. I'd rather freeze, Elian spat, his teeth chattering. I'd rather die in this alley than go back to that house with you. Julian's face hardened. The pain in his eyes was replaced by the steel of the Alpha. He couldn't reason with a hysterical Omega. He had to protect him, even if Elian hated him for it. Get him in the car, Julian ordered the guards, his voice devoid of emotion. No. Julian, please. Elian sobbed as the guards lifted him bodily and shoved him into the back seat of the luxury sedan. Julian climbed in after him and slammed the door, locking it instantly. The sound of the lock engaging echoed like a prison sentence. Drive, Julian commanded the driver. The private airfield. Now. The car surged forward. Inside, the silence was suffocating. Elian huddled in the far corner, pressing himself against the door, as far away from Julian as physically possible. He was shivering violently, his wet coat soaking the expensive leather seats. Julian watched him, his heart twisting in his chest. He wanted to pull Elian into his arms. He wanted to scent him, to flood him with comforting alpha pheromones until Elian calmed down. But he knew that right now, his scent would only smell like a threat. I found the texts, Julian said softly, breaking the silence. Elian didn't look at him. He stared out the window at the blurring city lights of Portland. Good. I didn't mean them, Elian. You have to believe me. It was posturing. It was business. Elian turned his head slowly. His eyes were dull, lifeless. Business, he repeated. Our marriage was business. Me being harmless was business. Sending me back to the countryside, Was that business too, Julian? Or was that just you finally admitting you were bored of your pet? I was never bored of you, Julian shouted, losing his composure. I was trying to protect you from Lydia. She wanted to destroy you. I thought if I made you seem insignificant, she would leave you alone. You did a great job, Elian whispered, his voice breaking. You made me feel insignificant, too. You made me feel like nothing. Elian, no. And then I found out about the baby. Elian's hand covered his stomach protectively. And I realized, if you could talk about me like that, what would you do to it? Would you send the baby away, too, if it wasn't an alpha? If it wasn't perfect? Never, Julian roared. The alpha growl vibrated in the small space, making the windows rattle. That is my child. My heir. I would burn the world for that child. That's the problem, Julian, Elian said, tears sliding down his cheeks again. It's always about what's yours. Your heir. Your house. Your husband. You don't love us. You just own us. Julian opened his mouth to argue, but the look in Elian's eyes stopped him. It was a look of absolute defeat. I called Noah, Elian said quietly. Julian stiffened. Jealousy, hot and ugly, flared in his chest. Noah, Elian's childhood friend. The beta who had always looked at Elian with too much affection. He's coming for me, Elian lied, hoping to scare Julian. He knows where I am. He won't get within 10 miles of you, Julian snarled. We're going home, Elian. We're going to fix this. You're going to see the best doctors. You're going to eat proper food. And you are not leaving my sight again. Ever. See. Elian laughed weakly. A cage. Suddenly, Elian gasped. His hands flew to his stomach, clutching the fabric of his coat. His face went gray. Elian. Julian moved instantly, ignoring the boundaries. He leaned over, grabbing Elian's shoulder. What is it? Pain. Elian wheezed, doubling over. It hurts. Julian, it hurts. A sharp, coppery scent filled the car. Blood. Julian's eyes widened in horror. He looked down. A dark stain was spreading on the beige upholstery beneath Elian. No, Julian whispered. No, no, no. The baby, Elian cried out, a sound of pure anguish. Something's wrong. It feels like it's tearing. Driver, Julian screamed, his voice cracking with panic. Forget the airfield. The hospital. The nearest hospital. Now. Hold on, Elian, Julian begged, pulling his husband into his lap, not caring about the blood, not caring about the resistance. He cradled Elian's head against his chest. Stay with me. Don't you dare close your eyes. I'm sorry, Elian mumbled, his consciousness fading as the pain overwhelmed him. His hand went limp in Julian's grip. I just wanted to be free. You are, Julian sobbed, rocking him back and forth. I promise I'll change. I'll change everything. Just save the baby. Just stay with me. The car swerved through traffic, sirens blaring from the escort vehicles. But inside the cabin, the world was narrowing down to the faint, erratic heartbeat of the Omega in Julian's arms. Elian's eyes rolled back. His breathing hitched, then slowed. Elian, stay with me, Julian commanded, pouring his alpha energy into the bond, trying to tether Elian's soul to his body. But for the first time, the command didn't work. Elian was slipping away, into the darkness where Julian's power couldn't reach him. As the lights of the emergency room came into view, Julian realized with a terrifying clarity. He had won the chase, but he was losing the prize. He had caught his husband, but he might have killed him in the process. The car screeched to a halt. Help! Julian screamed as the doors flew open, carrying the limp body of his pregnant husband out into the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital bay. Somebody help us. End of Part 3. Part 4. Code Blue. Trauma 1. We need an OBGYN stat. The doors to the emergency room burst open, slamming against the walls with a violence that made the receptionist jump. Julian Thorne, a man who owned half the city, was reduced to a blood-soaked phantom, sprinting alongside a gurney. Save him! Julian roared, his voice raw, unrecognizable. If he dies, I will bury this entire hospital. Sir, you have to stay back. A nurse, a beta with a face of stone, stepped in front of him, her hands raised. That is my husband. That is my child. Julian tried to shove past her, his alpha pheromones flooding the corridor, a suffocating wave of ozone, ash, and terrifying aggression. Other patients in the waiting area whimpered, instinctively shrinking away from the dominance of a prime alpha in a state of primal panic. Security, the nurse shouted. 2 large alpha guards grabbed Julian by the shoulders. Under normal circumstances, Julian would have broken them. He would have snapped their arms and continued his path. But he was weak. His knees were shaking. His eyes were fixed on the double doors swinging shut, swallowing Elian into the sterile white belly of the trauma unit. The last thing he saw was Elian's hand, pale and limp, slipping off the side of the gurney before a doctor tucked it back in. "Let me go," Julian whispered, the fight draining out of him as the doors clicked shut. "Please. You can't go in there, Mr. Thorne," the head of security said, his voice firm but cautious. "You're in a state of distress. Your pheromones will stress the patient. If you want him to live, you need to calm down. Calm down." The words felt like a joke. A cruel, impossible joke. Julian collapsed into a plastic chair in the hallway, putting his head in his hands. He looked at his palms. They were stained red. Elian's blood. It was drying, turning a dark, rusty brown. It was under his fingernails. He brought his hands to his face and inhaled. The scent was there, fading vanilla, overwhelmed by the metallic tang of hemorrhage and the sour, sharp smell of an Omega's terror. "I did this," he muttered to the linoleum floor. Marcus appeared silently by his side, handing him a wet towel. "Sir, clean yourself up. The press is already outside. We've locked down the perimeter, but rumors are leaking." "Let them leak," Julian said, wiping the blood from his hands with slow, mechanical movements. "I don't care about the press. I don't care about the stocks." "Lydia called," Marcus said, his voice low. Julian froze. The name sparked a flash of cold rage in his chest. "She wants to know if the situation has been resolved," Marcus continued, looking at his phone. "She says the board is calling for an emergency vote of no confidence." Julian stood up slowly. He took the phone from Marcus's hand. He didn't dial Lydia. He threw the phone onto the ground and crushed it under the heel of his blood-stained dress shoe. He ground it into plastic dust. "Tell the board," Julian said, his voice dead, "that if anyone calls me while my husband is in surgery, I will liquidate their assets before the sun comes up." Marcus nodded, a flicker of respect, or perhaps fear, in his eyes. Understood. 2 hours later. The waiting room was a purgatory of ticking clocks and hushed whispers. Julian hadn't moved. He hadn't drunk the water the nurses brought him. He hadn't changed his ruined shirt. He was replaying the last 5 years in his head. Every missed dinner. Every dismissed conversation. The way Elian used to smile when Julian came home early. A smile that had slowly faded over the years until it was just a polite mask. "You wanted fire," the note had said. Julian closed his eyes. He didn't want fire. He realized that now. Fire burned. Fire destroyed. He wanted the warmth. He wanted the soft, steady light that Elian had provided, the light Julian had tried to snuff out because he thought it made him look weak. The double doors opened. Dr. Eris, the chief of obstetrics, walked out. She was a stern-faced alpha female, wiping her hands on her scrubs. She looked exhausted. Julian was on his feet instantly. Dr. Eris didn't smile. She looked at Julian with a gaze that was judging, almost hostile. She didn't see a billionaire. She saw the man responsible for the carnage she had just spent 2 hours fixing. "He's alive," she said bluntly. Julian let out a breath he felt he had been holding for a lifetime. "And the baby?" Dr. Eris paused. The silence stretched, thin and taut. "The fetus is still viable," she said, choosing her words carefully. "But barely. It was a placental abruption, Mr. Thorne, caused by extreme physical and emotional trauma. We managed to stop the bleeding, but the pregnancy is now incredibly high risk. The placenta is fragile. Any stress, any at all, could cause a total detachment." "What does that mean?" Julian asked, his voice trembling. "It means," Dr. Eris stepped closer, lowering her voice to a lethal whisper, "that your husband is currently in a medically induced coma to keep his blood pressure down. When he wakes up, if he wakes up, he cannot be upset. He cannot be scared. And frankly, Mr. Thorne, his body is rejecting the bond." Julian recoiled as if she had slapped him. "Rejecting the bond? That's impossible. We are marked." "A mating mark is a two-way street," Dr. Eris said coldly. "It requires trust. An Omega's body can biologically reject an alpha if the subconscious perceives the alpha as a threat to survival. Elian's body is trying to purge your scent. Every time you get close to him, his heart rate spikes. His cortisol levels go through the roof. You are literally toxic to him right now." Julian stared at her, horror dawning on him. He wasn't just the cause of the accident. He was the poison. "So what are you saying?" Julian whispered. "I can't see him. I'm saying that if you walk into that room and release one drop of aggressive pheromones, or if he wakes up and sees the man who chased him down an alleyway, he will miscarry. And he might hemorrhage again. And this time, we won't be able to save either of them." She handed him a clipboard. He needs rest. Absolute quiet. And he needs to feel safe. Can you provide that, Mr. Thorne? Or are you the danger? Julian took the clipboard. His hand shook. I love him. Then love him from a distance, Dr. Eris said, turning to walk away. He's in room 304. Do not go in unless you can control yourself. Room 304. Julian stood outside the glass window of the ICU room. Inside, Elian looked tiny. He was hooked up to a dozen machines. A ventilator tube was taped to his mouth. His skin was the color of parchment. The heart monitor beeped a steady, fragile rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. Julian pressed his hand against the glass. He wanted to break it. He wanted to storm in there, hold Elian's hand, and demand that he wake up. But Dr. Eris's words echoed in his mind. You are toxic to him. He slid down the wall, sitting on the floor outside the room. He pulled his knees to his chest, the great Julian Thorne, looking like a lost child. I'm sorry, he whispered to the air. I'm so sorry. Time blurred. Night turned into morning. The sun began to creep through the hospital blinds, casting long, gray shadows across the hallway. Julian hadn't slept. Around 8 a.m., the alarms in room 304 didn't go off, but the rhythm of the beeping changed. It sped up. Dr. Eris rushed past him. He's waking up. We're taking him off sedation. Julian stood up, hovering by the door. Can I go in? Wait, Dr. Eris ordered. She went inside. Julian watched through the blinds. He saw Elian's eyelids flutter. He saw the confusion, then the panic. He saw Elian try to sit up, only to be gently pushed back down by the nurses. He saw Elian mouth a word. Baby. Dr. Eris nodded and said something soothing. Elian slumped back against the pillows, tears leaking from his eyes. Dr. Eris came out a moment later. He's asking for someone. Julian's heart leaped. Me. Dr. Eris looked at him with pity. No. He's asking for Noah. Julian felt the jealousy flare again, hot and sharp, but he swallowed it down. He crushed it until it tasted like bile. Noah is in Boston. He can't be here. Then you have to go in, Dr. Eris said. But be warned. If the monitor spikes, I am removing you. By force. Julian nodded. He took a deep breath, scrubbing his face, trying to look less like a monster and more like a husband. He opened the door. The room smelled of antiseptic and distress. Elian turned his head slowly. When his eyes met Julian's, there was no spark of recognition. No love. No anger. Just a profound, terrifying emptiness. Elian, Julian whispered, stepping closer but stopping at the foot of the bed. I'm here. Elian stared at him. His hand drifted to his stomach, resting on the hospital blankets. Why? The word was raspy, weak. Why? Julian repeated, confused. Because I'm your husband. Because I was worried. Why did you bring me back? Elian asked, his voice gaining a fraction of strength. I almost got away. You were bleeding, Julian pleaded. You would have died in that car. Maybe that would have been better, Elian said. The words sucked the oxygen out of the room. Julian gripped the footboard of the bed, so hard the metal groaned. Don't say that, Julian choked out. Don't you ever say that. We're going to have a baby. We are going to be a family. Elian let out a dry, humorless laugh that turned into a cough. He winced in pain. A family? You don't want a family, Julian. You want a legacy. And I am just the vessel. That's not true, isn't it? Elian looked at the ceiling. I heard you, Julian. I heard you tell the doctor to save the air. I heard you in the car. My child. My heir. Never Elian. Never me. I was panicked. I was trying to save both of you. You saved the part of me that matters to you, Elian whispered. He looked back at Julian, his blue eyes cold as ice. So here is the deal, Alpha. Julian flinched at the title. Elian never called him Alpha. He used it like a slur. I will carry this baby, Elian said, his voice trembling but determined. I will stay in this bed. I will take your vitamins. I will give you your air. Elian, please, we can work this out. But the day this baby is born, Elian cut him off. The day I hand it to you. I am leaving, and you are going to let me go. No, Julian shook his head. I won't sign the papers. You don't have to sign them, Elian said softly. Because if you try to keep me here, if you try to lock me in that penthouse again, I will stop fighting. I will let the grief take me. And you know what happens to an Omega who loses the will to live, Julian? We fade, and the baby fades with us. The threat hung in the air. It wasn't a bluff. It was a biological fact. Omegas could die of a broken heart. It was rare, but possible. Elian was holding his own life, and the life of their unborn child, hostage. You are blackmailing me, Julian whispered, horrified. With your own life? I learned from the best, Elian said, turning his head away to look out the window. You taught me that everything is a negotiation. So do we have a deal? Julian looked at the fragile figure in the bed. He looked at the monitor, which was spiking dangerously high. He had no choice. Deal, Julian rasped, a single tear escaping his eye and tracking through the dried blood on his cheek. You carry the baby to term. And then you are free. Elian closed his eyes. Get out. Your scent is making me sick. Julian turned and walked out of the room. He made it to the hallway before his legs gave out. He fell to his knees, gasping for air, while inside the room, the heart monitor finally began to slow down. But the silence in the corridor was broken by the vibration of his phone. The replacement Marcus had just handed him. It was a text message from an unknown number. Julian opened it, his vision blurry. It was a photo of the hospital entrance, taken from across the street. And then, a photo of Julian kneeling in the hallway, taken through the glass doors just seconds ago. The text underneath read, "He looks weak, Julian. A weak alpha can't hold a territory. And a weak alpha can't protect his mate. I'm coming for what you stole." Julian stared at the screen. It wasn't Lydia. It was someone from his past. Someone he thought he had buried a long time ago. The hunt wasn't over. It had just begun. End of Part 4. Part 5. 3 months later. The penthouse was warmer now. Julian had installed heated floors. He had replaced the stark, modern art with soft tapestries that absorbed sound. He had filled the kitchen with organic foods, specific teas for nausea, and the softest blankets money could buy. It was a perfect nest. And it was completely silent. Julian sat at the dining table, the same table where he had found the divorce papers 3 months ago, watching Elian eat. Elian was 7 months pregnant now. His belly was a prominent, round curve beneath his oversized cashmere sweater. He moved slowly, with a waddle that Julian found heartbreakingly endearing, his hand constantly resting on the bump as if shielding the child from the world. Specifically, shielding the child from Julian. "Is the soup okay?" Julian asked, his voice low, trying to suppress the alpha rumble that naturally occurred when he looked at his pregnant mate. Elian didn't look up. He stirred the broth with his spoon. "It's fine." 2 words. That was the most Julian had gotten out of him in days. "Dr. Eris is coming at 2 o'clock for the ultrasound," Julian continued, desperate for connection. "I cleared my schedule. I'll be there." "You don't have to," Elian said, finally lifting his eyes. They were blue, clear, and utterly detached. "I can do it alone." "It's my son, too, Elian." "Biologically," Elian corrected. He pushed the half-eaten bowl away. "May I be excused? My back hurts." Julian's hands clenched into fists under the table, but he forced a smile. "Of course. Do you want a massage? I read a book on prenatal." "No," Elian stood up, using the table for support. He flinched when Julian reached out to steady him. "I'm fine. I'm going to the nursery." Julian watched him walk away. The rejection was a physical pain, a constant ache in his chest. For 3 months, Julian had been a model husband. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't gone to the office past 5 p.m. He had cut ties with Lydia completely, publicly and brutally, ruining her career in the process as an offering to Elian. But it didn't matter. Elian was fulfilling his end of the contract. He was staying alive. He was eating. He was growing the baby. But his heart was closed. He was counting down the days. Not until the baby was born, but until he could leave. Julian stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city below was gray and rainy. His phone buzzed. It wasn't a text. It was a security alert. Perimeter breach, south balcony. Sensor 4. Julian's blood went cold. He was on the 50th floor. There was no way to breach the balcony unless you came from the roof. He didn't call Marcus. He pulled the 9mm pistol he now kept taped under the dining table. "Elian," Julian shouted, abandoning the calm alpha persona. "Get to the safe room. Now." "What?" Elian's voice drifted from the hallway, confused. Crash. The glass of the balcony shattered inward. 2 figures in black tactical gear swung into the living room, rappelling from ropes attached to the roof. Julian didn't hesitate. He fired. Bang. Bang. One intruder went down, clutching his shoulder. The other rolled behind the sofa, returning fire. A bullet whizzed past Julian's ear, shattering a vase. "Elian, run." Julian roared, diving behind the marble kitchen island. He heard a scream from the hallway. Not Elian. A third intruder. They had come through the front door, too. Julian's vision turned red. The primal protective instinct, the berserker rage of an alpha whose pregnant mate is threatened, took over. He vaulted over the island, ignoring the gunfire from the living room. He sprinted toward the hallway. He saw a man grabbing Elian by the arm. Elian was struggling, kicking, holding his stomach with one hand. "Get off him!" Julian snarled, a sound that was more animal than human. He tackled the intruder, slamming him into the wall. The impact cracked the plaster. Julian didn't use his gun. He used his fists. He beat the man until he stopped moving. "Julian!" Elian screamed. Julian spun around. The intruder from the living room, the one he had missed, was standing there, a gun pointed directly at Elian's stomach. "Stop!" the man shouted. "Drop the gun, Thorn, or the kid dies before it takes its first breath." Julian froze. His chest was heaving. Blood, not his own, dripped from his knuckles. He slowly placed his gun on the floor and kicked it away. "Who sent you?" Julian hissed. "Silas. Tell Silas Vane if he touches my family, I will skin him alive." The gunman laughed. "Silas says hello. He says he wants what you owe him. A life for a life." Elian was trembling violently, his back pressed against the nursery door. He looked at Julian. For the first time in months, there was no wall in his eyes. Only terror. And trust. He was looking at Julian to save them. "Let him go," Julian said, stepping forward, hands raised. "Take me. I'm the one Silas hates. Leave the Omega out of it." "Silas doesn't want you," the gunman sneered. "He wants to watch you suffer. And what better way than to take the air?" The gunman shifted his aim from Elian's stomach to Elian's head. "No." Julian lunged. Bang. The sound was deafening in the narrow hallway. Elian screamed, squeezing his eyes shut. But the pain didn't come. He opened his eyes. Julian was standing in front of him. He had thrown his body between the gun and Elian. Julian swayed. He looked down. A dark, blossoming red stain was spreading across his white shirt, right below his ribs. "Julian," Elian whispered. Julian didn't fall. He gritted his teeth, grabbed the gunman's wrist with his last reserve of strength, and twisted it. The bone snapped. The gunman howled, dropping the weapon. Marcus and the security team burst through the front door, guns drawn. "Clear the room," Marcus shouted. The intruders were neutralized in seconds. But Julian was sliding down the wall. "Julian!" Elian dropped to his knees, ignoring the pain in his own back. He pressed his hands against Julian's wound. The blood was hot. Too much of it. "Did they?" Julian coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Did they touch you?" "No." Elian was crying now, hysterically. "No, I'm fine. You're shot. Marcus, call the ambulance." "I promised," Julian wheezed, his hand reaching up to touch Elian's cheek. His fingers left a bloody smear on Elian's pale skin. "I promised I'd protect you. Even from me." "Don't talk," Elian sobbed. "Just breathe. Why did you do that? You idiot, why did you do that?" "Because," Julian's eyes were losing focus. "You are not just a vessel. You are everything. Elian, I love." His hand fell. His eyes rolled back. "No." Elian shook him. "Julian, wake up. You can't die. You can't die and leave me here." Suddenly, a sharp, tearing pain ripped through Elian's abdomen. Not the dull ache from before. This was a contraction. A violent, earth-shattering contraction that brought him to his knees beside Julian's unconscious body. Water gushed onto the floor, mixing with the pool of Julian's blood. "Marcus!" Elian screamed, clutching his stomach. "The baby. It's coming." 1 hour later, St. Jude's Hospital. The chaos of the ER was a blur. This time, there were 2 gurneys. "Mr. Thorne has a gunshot wound to the abdomen. Losing pressure. Prep the OR. Patient 2 is in active labor. 32 weeks. Fetal distress. Get the NICU team." Elian was being wheeled down the hall, his hand reaching out for Julian's gurney, which was moving in the opposite direction. "Julian," Elian cried out. "We have to take him to surgery, honey," a nurse said, holding Elian down. "You need to focus on breathing." "Is he going to die?" Elian gasped between contractions that felt like they were splitting his spine in half. "They are doing everything they can. Now push. You have to push." Elian was wheeled into the delivery room. The lights were blinding. The pain was unbearable. But the emotional pain was worse. He had spent 3 months hating Julian. He had spent 3 months building a fortress around his heart, telling himself that Julian was a monster, that Julian only cared about the air. But the monster had taken a bullet for him. The monster had looked at him with pure, unadulterated love while he bled out on the floor. "He loves me," Elian realized with a sob. "He really loves me." And now it might be too late. Elian, listen to me. Dr. Eris was there, masked and serious. The baby is in distress. The stress triggered a placental abruption again. We need to do an emergency C-section. Now. Save the baby, Elian whispered, the anesthesia mask coming down over his face. And tell Julian, tell him I stayed. The darkness took him. The void. Elian dreamt. He dreamt of the cottage in Maine. He was standing on the porch, looking at the ocean. It was peaceful. It was free. But he was alone. He turned around. The cottage was empty. There was no baby. There was no Julian. Is this freedom? The wind asked. No, Elian answered in the dream. It's just loneliness. He heard a baby crying. A thin, reedy sound. He ran toward it. The awakening. Elian woke up to the sound of beeping. It was familiar. He blinked, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. He was in a hospital room. His stomach felt flat. Empty. Panic seized him. He tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in his lower abdomen stopped him. The C-section incision. Easy, easy, a soft voice said. Elian turned his head. It was Noah. His friend was sitting in the chair, looking tired. Noah. Elian croaked. The baby? Where is the baby? He's in the NICU. Noah smiled gently. It's a boy, Elian. He's small, 4 pounds, but he's a fighter. Strong lungs. Elian let out a sob of relief. He's alive. Thank God. Then, the memory crashed back. The gun. The blood. Julian. Elian gripped Noah's arm. Where is Julian? Noah's face fell. He looked away. Noah. Elian's voice rose in pitch. Tell me. Is he dead? He's in the ICU, Noah said quietly. He lost a lot of blood, Elian. The bullet nicked his liver. He went into cardiac arrest on the table. But he's alive. Technically, Noah hesitated. He's in a coma. The doctors don't know if he'll wake up. They said, the oxygen deprivation might have been too long. Elian felt like the bullet had hit him, not Julian. I need to see him. Elian, you just had surgery. You can't walk. Get me a wheelchair, Elian commanded, his voice trembling with an alpha-like authority he didn't know he possessed. Get me a wheelchair, or I will crawl. The ICU. Julian looked different than he had 3 months ago. He was pale, almost translucent. A tube was down his throat. His chest rose and fell with the mechanical rhythm of the ventilator. Elian wheeled himself to the side of the bed. He reached out and took Julian's hand. It was cold, limp. This was the hand that had signed the divorce papers. This was the hand that had built an empire. This was the hand that had blocked a bullet. You promised, Elian whispered, leaning his forehead against the metal rail of the bed. You promised you'd fix this. He placed Julian's cold hand against his own cheek. I'm not leaving, Elian cried softly. The contract is void, Julian. I'm not leaving. I saw you. I saw what you did. You are not a monster. You're just a broken idiot. He kissed Julian's knuckles. Wake up. Please, Alpha. Wake up and meet your son. There was no movement. No flutter of eyelids. Just the steady, indifferent hiss of the ventilator. But then, the heart monitor skipped a beat. Beep, 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 beep. Elian lifted his head. On the other side of the glass, Marcus was standing with his phone. He looked pale. He tapped on the glass to get Elian's attention. Elian frowned. He wheeled himself to the door and opened it. What is it? Elian asked. Is it Silas? Did you catch him? We caught the shooter, Marcus said grimly. He talked. And, he said Silas Vane isn't working alone. Marcus showed Elian a photo on his phone. It was a surveillance photo from a cafe, taken 2 days ago. It showed Silas Vane sitting at a table. And sitting across from him, smiling, handing him a blueprint of the penthouse security system, was Lydia. Elian stared at the photo. The rage that filled him was new. It wasn't the fear of a prey animal. It was the fury of a mother. She gave him the codes, Elian whispered. She tried to kill my baby. She tried to kill Julian. Elian looked back at Julian's unconscious form. Then he looked at Marcus. Marcus, Elian said, his voice cold as steel. You told me once that the Thorne family has resources that aren't strictly legal. Yes, sir. Marcus straightened up. Use them, Elian ordered. Find her. Find Silas. And bring them to me. To you, sir? Marcus looked surprised. But you're an Omega. Elian looked down at his C-section bandage, then up at Marcus with eyes that burned with a blue fire. I am the mother of the Thorne heir, Elian declared. And until my husband wakes up, I am the head of this family. Burn them down. End of Part 5. Part 6. 3 days later. The boardroom of Thorne Conglomerate was a fortress of glass and steel, suspended high above the city clouds. Usually, this room was filled with the scent of alpha pheromones, dominance, aggression, and power. Today, it smelled of something else. It smelled of vanilla. But not the soft, sweet vanilla of a submissive house spouse. This vanilla was sharp, cold, and overlaid with the metallic tang of absolute fury. Elian sat at the head of the table. Julian's chair. He was still wearing his hospital wristband. He was pale, moving stiffly due to the C-section stitches pulling at his abdomen. But he was dressed in one of Julian's black suits, tailored rapidly to fit his slender frame. Marcus stood behind him, a silent sentinel. The double doors opened. Lydia Kincaid walked in. She looked impeccable in a crimson dress, her heels clicking arrogantly against the floor. She didn't look like a woman who had just conspired to murder a billionaire. She looked like a woman coming to claim her prize. She stopped when she saw Elian. A flicker of confusion crossed her face, quickly replaced by a sneer. "Well," Lydia scoffed, tossing her bag onto the table. "The grieving widow. I didn't expect to see you here, Elian. Shouldn't you be crying by a bedside somewhere?" Elian didn't blink. He didn't rise. He simply rested his hands on the mahogany table, fingers interlaced. "I'm not a widow yet, Lydia," Elian said. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the room without a tremor. "And you are not a partner in this company anymore." Lydia laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Oh, honey, you don't understand how this works. With Julian incapacitated and the stock plummeting, the board is looking for leadership. Real leadership. Not an Omega who got knocked up and caused a scandal." She leaned forward, placing her palms on the table. "Silas and I have the majority vote. We are taking over. And my first act as CEO will be to evict you from that penthouse." Elian stared at her. He thought of the gun pointed at his stomach. He thought of Julian bleeding out on the floor. He thought of his son, Leo, hooked up to tubes in the NICU, fighting for every breath because of this woman's greed. "Show her," Elian said to Marcus. Marcus stepped forward and tapped a button on the remote. The projector screen behind Elian came to life. Lydia's confidence faltered. On the screen, a video played. It was grainy, taken from a hidden camera inside a warehouse. It showed Silas Vane handing a heavy briefcase to a man. "Make it look like a robbery," Silas's voice on the recording was clear. "But make sure the Omega dies. If the baby survives, it's messy. Kill them both. Thorne will be too broken to fight back." Then, the video cut to an audio recording. "Here are the security codes, Silas. The balcony sensor is disabled. Do it tonight. I'm tired of waiting." Lydia's voice. The color drained from Lydia's face. She staggered back, clutching the edge of the table. That's fake. Deep fake. You can't prove." "We have the bank transfers," Elian interrupted, tossing a file folder across the table. It slid and stopped right in front of her. "We have the confession from the shooter. And we have Silas Vane." Lydia froze. "What?" "Marcus picked him up an hour ago," Elian said coldly. "He was trying to board a flight to the Caymans. He gave you up, Lydia. He squealed like a pig to save his own skin." "No," Lydia whispered. "No, you can't. Julian is dying. He can't protect you." "I don't need Julian to protect me from you." Elian stood up slowly, wincing slightly from the pain in his incision, but standing tall. The aura radiating off him was blinding. It was the energy of a Luna, the counterpart to the Alpha, equal in every way. "I am the father of the Thorne heir," Elian declared. "I hold Julian's power of attorney. And I just transferred your entire share of the company to a charity for Omega rights. You are bankrupt, Lydia." "You can't do that." Lydia shrieked, lunging for him. The doors burst open. 4 police officers entered. "Lydia Kincaid," the lead officer announced. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, corporate espionage, and domestic terrorism." As the officers grabbed her, Lydia thrashed, her mask of elegance shattering completely. "Elian, you rat. You ruined everything. He doesn't love you. He only wants the baby." Elian watched her being dragged away. He didn't look triumphant. He just looked tired. "He loves me enough to take a bullet," Elian whispered to the empty room. "That's more than anyone ever loved you." He turned to Marcus. "Take me back to the hospital." "The hospital, ICU." The victory felt hollow the moment Elian entered the ICU. The machines were still beeping. Julian was still motionless. Elian sat in the chair he had practically lived in for the last 3 days. He reached through the bars of the bed and held Julian's hand. "It's done," Elian told the sleeping Alpha. "Lydia is gone. Silas is in jail. The company is safe." He squeezed Julian's hand, his voice breaking. "You can wake up now. You don't have to fight anymore. I fought for us today, Julian. I held the territory. Now come back to me. Silence. Elian laid his head on the mattress. Exhaustion finally overtook him. The adrenaline of the confrontation faded, leaving him trembling. I named him, Elian mumbled, his eyes closing. I named him Leo. Like a lion. Because he's brave. Like you. He drifted into a restless sleep, his hand still clutching Julian's. Darkness. Then a voice. Elian. It was faint, like a radio signal cutting through static. Elian. Elian jerked awake. His neck was stiff. The room was dark, lit only by the monitors. He looked at the bed. Julian's eyes were open. They were hazy, unfocused, and heavy with drugs, but they were open, and they were looking at Elian. Julian. Elian scrambled up, pressing the nurse call button frantically. Julian, can you hear me? Julian tried to speak, but the ventilator tube gagged him. He panicked for a second, the monitor spiking. Shoo, it's okay, it's okay. Elian stroked his hair, pouring soothing pheromones into the air, sweet milk and vanilla, the scent of safety. You're in the hospital. You were shot. Don't fight the tube. The doctors rushed in. He's awake. Get the respiratory therapist. The next hour was a blur of activity. They removed the tube. They checked his vitals. They asked him to squeeze fingers and wiggle toes. Finally, the room cleared out. Dr. Eris gave Elian a small smile. He's tough. He's going to make it. Elian was left alone with his husband. Julian looked wrecked. His voice was a gravelly whisper, raw from the tube. The baby, was his first word. He's okay. Elian smiled, tears streaming down his face. He's in the NICU. He's small, but he's perfect, Julian. He has your nose. Julian let out a breath that sounded like a sob. He tried to lift his hand to touch Elian's face, but he was too weak. Elian caught his hand and pressed it to his cheek. You stayed, Julian whispered, staring at Elian as if he were a hallucination. I thought you'd leave while I was asleep. I told you, Elian said, kissing his palm. I saw you. You jumped in front of a gun for me. You stupid, reckless alpha. I had to, Julian managed a weak smirk. My world was in the line of fire. Elian froze. Your world. You, Julian rasped. Not the air. You. I realized it, in the ambulance. If the baby lived but you died, I wouldn't survive it. I don't want a legacy, Elian. I just want you. The walls Elian had built, the fear, the resentment, the contract, crumbled into dust. I love you, Elian sobbed, burying his face in Julian's neck, careful of the bandages. I love you so much. Don't you ever scare me like that again. I promise, Julian whispered, closing his eyes, a look of profound peace settling on his face. No more running. No more chasing. 2 weeks later. The day Leo was discharged from the NICU was the brightest day of the year. Julian was still in a wheelchair, recovering, but he refused to let anyone else hold the car seat. He sat in the wheelchair, the carrier balanced on his lap, looking at the sleeping bundle inside with an expression of absolute awe. He's so small, Julian whispered. Are we sure we can take him home? What if I break him? You won't break him, Elian laughed, walking beside him. Elian looked healthy, his color returned, his step light. You held a hostile takeover at bay for 10 years, Julian. You can handle a 4-pound baby. This is scarier, Julian admitted. They took the elevator up to the penthouse. When the doors opened, the apartment was different. The broken glass was gone. The blood was cleaned. But more than that, the energy had changed. It wasn't a show home anymore. There was a playpen in the corner of the living room. There were bottles drying on the marble counter. It felt lived in. It felt like a home. Julian wheeled himself into the nursery. He watched as Elian lifted Leo out of the carrier and placed him in the crib Elian had designed. Julian stood up, wincing slightly, and walked over to wrap his arms around Elian's waist from behind. He rested his chin on Elian's shoulder. Thank you, Julian whispered into Elian's ear. For what? For giving me a second chance. I didn't deserve it. Elian turned in his arms. He reached up and fixed Julian's collar. You earned it. You bled for it. Just don't make me regret it. Never, Julian vowed. He leaned down and kissed Elian. It wasn't a hungry, possessive kiss. It was slow, tender, and filled with a deep, abiding gratitude. Leo stirred in the crib, letting out a soft, kitten-like mewl. They both froze, then looked down. Leo opened his eyes. They were blue. Bright, piercing blue. He's looking at you, Elian whispered. Julian reached down, offering his finger. The baby's tiny hand wrapped around Julian's large finger, gripping it with surprising strength. Hello, Leo, Julian said softly, tears pricking his eyes. I'm your dad, and I'm going to make sure you never, ever feel alone. Epilogue, 1 year later. The garden of the summer house in Maine was in full bloom. It wasn't the dilapidated cottage Elian had found online. Julian had bought the property and built a beautiful, sun-drenched estate on the cliffside. Elian sat on the porch swing, a sketchbook in his lap. He was drawing the ocean. Dada! A squeal broke the silence. Elian looked up to see a chubby, golden-haired toddler stumbling across the grass. Leo was walking. Well, running clumsily. And chasing him, laughing, was Julian. Julian was barefoot. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, no suit in sight. He scooped Leo up and spun him around, the sound of their laughter mixing with the crash of the waves. Julian looked over at the porch. He caught Elian's eye. He smiled, a genuine, dazzling smile that reached his eyes. He walked over, carrying Leo on his hip. He's fast, Julian panted, sitting next to Elian on the swing. He's going to be a runner. He gets that from me, Elian teased, closing his sketchbook. Hopefully he doesn't run as far as his papa did. Julian kissed Elian's temple. He won't have to. Elian leaned his head on Julian's shoulder, looking at their son, who was busy trying to eat Julian's t-shirt. Because he knows exactly where he belongs. Julian wrapped his arm around his family, pulling them close. The scent of the ocean mixed with vanilla and expensive musk, creating a new scent. The scent of happiness. The phone Julian had left at home that fateful day sat on the table inside, forgotten and uncharged. He didn't need it. Everything that mattered was right here, in his arms. The end.